Welcome! In this lesson, you're going to get started creating web pages. And as you go, you'll be learning some important concepts about how computer languages work.
We'll be talking about what the web is, what it's built of, and the basics of how it works. You'll get practice editing web pages using a programmer's text editor and testing your work in your browser.
You'll learn the fundamentals of HTML, the computer language that we use to structure and write web pages, and also about URLs, the addresses that we use to refer to documents and sites on the web. And you'll put all of this together by taking notes on what you've learned and turning those notes into a web page. The web is a big topic, so where should we get started? Well, how about what's the web made of?
Well, in one sense, the web is a collection of documents written in HTML, along with other resources such as images and videos, as well as programs and services that interact with these documents and resources.
Everything that you can access using your web browser is part of the web. Those resources are spread out among thousands and thousands of different computer systems.
The web is a hypertext system. What this means is that documents, web pages, sites, web apps can contain references to other documents, and users can follow those references to find related information.
That's what you're doing every time you, say, click on a link in a blog post or a news article. We call these references hyperlinks, or links for short. And the ability to follow them from document to document is what makes the web web-like.
This hypertext ability to refer to other information is also used whenever a web page includes an image or a video or a piece of code.
Hypertext is kind of a big deal. All of web technology is built around this idea of documents and other data objects that can link to each other in a standard way. Exactly how this works? Well, that's what you'll see throughout the rest of this lesson.
Most of the time, your browser gets web pages by communicating with servers over the internet. Servers are just computers. They're not fundamentally different from the one you're using right now. But they have programs running on them that answer a browser's requests. Your computer is probably connected to Udacity's web server right now, as well as to other web servers.
One of the superpowers of the web is that you can make links to a file or document that's on a different server. For instance, Udacity's website tells your browser to show this video, which is hosted on YouTube's website. A web page can include resources such as videos, images, fonts, or program code from the same web server or from other web servers.
Web browsers and servers interact in a pretty specific way. When you go to a web page or follow a link, your browser makes a request to the server, asking for a particular document by name. And the server sends a response back to the browser containing that document. Or, if it can't find that document, it sends an error message instead. The rules for how these requests and responses work are called the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP. That's why web addresses usually start with HTTP or HTTPS. It's telling the browser how to talk to the server.
But when you're building a web page for the first time, you won't need to run a server or have any HTTP involved. Instead, you will just save the web page as a file on your computer and open it up in your browser. Your browser can display documents that are stored on your computer, as well as ones from the internet. Later, when you want to publish a web page to the rest of the world, you will do that by putting it onto a server.
So, what goes into a web page? HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language, is the language that we use to provide the structure and the text of web pages. When you load up a website in your browser, the first thing that server sends to your browser is a piece of HTML.
If you look at that HTML file using programmer's tools, you will see all the technical details that tell the browser what to do. When you open that same file in a web browser, the browser will follow those instructions to build and display the page.
Let's take a look at the 5 statements on this quiz. Number 1 was, when you type udacity.com into your browser communicates with Udacity's server using HTTP. Well, that's true. There are a bunch of things involved in getting a web page to your browser, but one of them is that your browser communicates with the server using HTTP. The browser sends a request for the page, and the server responds. And what's in that response is number 2, a piece of HTML. So number 2 is true. Number 3 says that your browser has to copy all of the files from the web server. That's not true. The browser only fetches a copy of the particular files or resources that the page needs. And that's what number 4 says. So number 4 is true. Your browser requests other files from our server and other web servers. And number 5 says that everything on Udacity's website has to come from Udacity's server. Now that's not true. Web pages can include or refer to files located on other servers as well. For instance, this video isn't hosted on the same server that provided the HTML around it. Writing in HTML is a good place to start thinking about programming, because it lets you try out a few ideas that are really essential to programming, but it also lets you get really quick feedback on what you're learning, because you can see everything in your web browser. As you work through this lesson, here are some big concepts to watch for. Keeping an eye out for these will help you a lot. The first concept to watch for is syntax, which is another word for the grammar rules of a language. Now, natural languages like English have grammar rules, and so do computer languages like HTML or Python. For instance, in English we would say, "The dog ran through the yard," and not "dog yard ran the through." That would be ungrammatical. It wouldn't make sense. And that's what programmers call a syntax error. Now, computer languages have grammar rules too, rules for how you put your code together. As you learn a new language, you'll pick up on these grammar rules. Sometimes we'll tell you these rules explicitly. Other times, you'll learn them by example. The second thing to keep in mind is something that computer scientists call formalism, but sometimes programmers will call computers are stupid. With a few exceptions, computers take code totally literally, word for word, letter for letter. The computer cannot guess what you really mean. It can only do what you tell it to. For instance, in HTML, if you want to put a title on a web page, you'll write the word title inside these symbols. If you write a typo like TILTE instead, the computer will not guess that you mean TITLE. You always have to be careful with spelling and punctuation in programming. There's usually no autocorrect. A third big idea is an aspect of syntax that will keep showing up in every computer language you learn. This is the concept of nesting. It has to do with how some bits of code can go inside other bits of code in an orderly way. Now, this is something that we have in human language too. For instance, when we tell a story where people talk about talking with each other, we can use nested quote marks to say that Jessica said that Bob told her something about Mary. You'll see things like this in programming as well. Now, that was a little abstract, I know. When nesting comes up, we'll try to point it out for you, and it will show up pretty often. The last big idea I want you to be aware of as you learn is that there is a lot of help available. There are a lot of people in the world learning to code right now. You're one of them, and there are a lot of resources to help you learn. One of a programmer's most important tools is documentation, the manuals and tutorials that are out there for the languages that you're learning and working with. For instance, you can find out just about everything there is to know about HTML by looking it up on the Mozilla Developer Network, or MDN, website. Aside from the resources that Udacity brings you, there's a whole lot of help that you can find just by using your favorite search engine.
HTML documents and programs in almost every programming language are written in text files. Let's take a look at what this means. Text files contain nothing but characters, letters, numbers, symbols, spaces, and so on. They don't contain any special typography, such as bold or italics or colors. They don't contain any photos, icons, or other images. You can imagine text as anything you could type on an old-fashioned typewriter. Text seems like it would be very limiting, but it's also very flexible. It can be used for countless different things. HTML is written in text, but so are programming languages used to do data analysis or write servers. There are programs that can take text input and turn it into musical notation, or format it for a scientific paper, or load specially organized text into a spreadsheet. As you look at HTML code, it might look like it has a lot of weird things going on, but it's really all just made up of text. The layout of a web page, as seen by the user, is put together by the web browser, based on the code in that text file. And when a web page includes an image or a video, like the video you're watching right now, it does that by including a text-based address in the code of the page. The browser sees the address and then downloads the right images or videos to put into that page. When you load an HTML file into a programmer's text editor, you'll often see it displayed with colors and special formatting. This is called syntax highlighting, and it's a special feature of that editor. Those colors aren't saved in the file. Rather, the editor knows the grammar of HTML, and it applies colors in order to help you get the grammar right as you're editing it. When you save a file, it's conventional to use a file name that has a particular ending, or extension, indicating the file's type. This helps programs such as editors and browsers treat the file appropriately. For HTML, we'll use file name endings in .html. This quiz asked you which of 5 kinds of files were made of text. The first is a story that you wrote in the Atom editor. If you write a story in Atom, it will be in plain text, so that's correct. The second item on the quiz is a piece of music on your phone. Well, let's see what happens if we take a music file and open it up in a text editor. I've got an MP3 file here of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Let me open it up in Atom. Well, wow, what a mess. The text editor is trying its darndest to treat the file as text, but it just isn't. A text editor doesn't know what to do with an MP3. Music files are generally not text. The third is Udacity's homepage. The homepage is made up of HTML, and HTML is written in text, so this is correct too. The fourth is a photo of a dog. Photos are not text. Browsers know how to display photos and other images, but if you try to open it up in a text editor, you will see a big mess, just like with the MP3 music file. To edit a photo, you need photo editing software. The last is a bit tricky, a PDF file of a legal contract. When you look at a PDF in your browser or in a program like Adobe Acrobat, you can usually see words and sentences and stuff, so that seems kind of like text-ish, but a PDF isn't a text file and you can't edit it in a text editor. The same is true for word processor files from programs like MS Word. We don't ever use a word processor to edit text files such as HTML or other programs. We use a text editor.
In this video, I'm going to show you a simple setup for working with your HTML files. On the left side here, I have my text editor, and on the right side, I have my web browser. Now, there are many text editors out there, each with its own features. Most editors have some basic features that are really handy, like syntax highlighting, to help you tell the different parts of the code apart, and line numbers, so that you can easily refer to a particular line of code. We'll show you some links to some of our favorite text editors, but feel free to experiment and see which one you like the best. If you do pick something that's not on our list, make sure that you're using a text editor, and not a word processor like Microsoft Word, Google Docs, or Pages. A text editor edits plain basic text files. In contrast, a word processor does a lot more than just edit text. They also add information to your files about how to format the text, set the font, even insert tables and images. If you try to edit your code in a word processor, it may look like you've created a plain text file, but there's actually hidden information in the file that would cause your code to fail. So again, make sure that you're using a text editor like the ones we're linking below, and that the files you're creating are plain text files. So here's a basic way to work with this setup. In my text editor, I'm going to type some text. And then I will save my file. In order to make sure that the browser recognizes it as an HTML file, I make sure to use the .html extension on my file name. And here's the folder where I saved my file. I'm just going to click and drag this file over to my browser, so the browser opens it. And as you can see, there's the text that I put in my file. If you're on a Mac, you may also be able to drag the icon from the title bar of your text editor and drag that over to your browser. That does exactly the same thing. Or instead of dragging the file in, you can go to your browser's file menu and open it from there if you'd rather do it that way. So now I have my text editor with my code over here, and my browser displaying how that code gets rendered over here. If I make a change to the code, like adding some HTML to format it, it doesn't immediately show up in the browser. I have to save, and then hit the refresh button. And then there are the changes I made. Now this is just one way to do this. There are lots of different ways to set up your programming environment, and you should feel free to develop whatever approach works best for you. The important thing is to have some place where you can edit your code and try things out, right along some place where you can easily see the results of those changes. Generally, I can't write a whole bunch of code in one go because something will go wrong and I'll need to find the issue and fix it. When I'm working on my code, I like to be experimenting a lot and testing the results frequently, so I can see whether the changes are behaving in the way that I expect. So however you set things up, it will help you learn best if you make sure that your setup helps you to get this kind of immediate feedback on your work. So we're going to discuss HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language. HTML documents are the building blocks of the web. The web is basically made up of these documents, and they can do a number of things. So HTML is made up of text that the user will actually read in their browser, and markup, which tells the browser what that text should look like, or how it's arranged. And within markup, there can be references to include other documents and files, like images and videos. Now, let's imagine this box is a web page, and you've got some text, and there's an image in your page. Or, like the page you're looking at now, which has got a video in the middle of it. You know, the page you're looking at now is made up of HTML, and it's got a reference to this video. And HTML could also include links to other pages. Links let the user move around from one page to another. Now, let's play around with HTML for a little bit. Using your text editor, like VS Code, follow along with this video by creating a new file in your text editor and saving it, maybe calling it something like testing.html, and working in that file. Your text editor lets you work on several files at once if you like. Just make sure to save each one of them after you make changes. And then, when you want to render your HTML file, just open it up with your browser. You can usually do that by dragging the file icon onto the browser window, or using the Open File command in the menus. The first thing I want to show you is if we have some plain text in an HTML file. If we were to render this as HTML with the browser, it would look pretty much the same. For the most part, plain text in HTML shows up as plain text in the browser. But if we want to make the text look different, we'd need to use markup, which is one of the other aspects of HTML.